Miles. This is Jamie.
And Kimmy.
And we have a guest with us today. Say hi, James.
Hey everyone.
Because of COVID-19, many of us have had our weekly D&D routines disrupted. However, there are online services that provide a platform with which you can play D&D with your friends or use other systems to keep up with those tabletop games that we all know and love and to keep in touch with our friends. The one that our group is using is Roll20, and I do believe it is one of the more popular platforms to play D&D online. And so today we're going to talk about Roll20 and we're going to talk about how our personal D&D experience has changed playing the same campaign with the same group but switching from in-person tabletop to playing completely online. So Kimmy and I are going to share our experiences, and James is also in our campaign, so he is going to share his experiences, but he also has plenty of experience DMing with Roll20 before and after the social distancing was put in place. And then, near the end of the episode, I have asked my friend Miles, who works for Roll20 in their customer service department, some questions about the changes to Roll20 since the start of social distancing. And I'm going to read those questions and his excellent answers near the end of today's episode. So, without further ado, Kimmy, would you like to start us off with what you have noticed is different about the D&D experience since we stopped playing in person and started using Roll20 exclusively?
Yeah, sure. Well, the biggest thing that is very strange and a big shock for me is just not being around people. I have a different feeling. Like I actually feel different sitting in a computer and just hearing my friends, and most of you guys have video too so I can see you, but it's not the same feeling as literally sitting next to somebody. But it's not a bad feeling. It's just different. So I wonder how many of you are like understand what I'm saying and have felt that now. Used to sitting next to having somebody squish next to your right and to your left, and then now you're kind of just by yourself, but you're not. So that's kind of strange, but not bad. Another thing is the big thing that I've really noticed is we tend to focus a bit more on each other because it's like there's that difficulty of hearing and almost that fear of missing something. So I feel like we talk less because you have to be able to hear what everybody's saying, and not everybody can talk all at once through like when you're online. Obviously, people cut out. So that's been definitely different. Um, and I really miss rolling real dice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like I have dice out for me to just like play with, and I like hold them and stuff while we play, cuz the first like two times we played D&D online, I was like really missing it. So then I got dice out. Just to kind of just to have that. So, but I'm just curious like if you guys kind of feel like what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that applies to all aspects of our lives right now. And it is sad to not be around our friends in person, but in some ways, it's a little bit nicer because with a group as large as ours, with 7 players usually, it was very crowded around the table. And we were
That's
also
for sure.
sitting on, you know, wooden chairs or metal fold out chairs, and it was not very comfortable.
Yeah.
So I like that we each have our own designated space and we can sit in our office chairs in front of our computers. And the only thing that is still uncomfortable for me is if I am wearing my headset, then it pushes my glasses into the side of my face. And if I'm wearing my
Oh.
earbuds, it makes my ears sore. But I have
So
to wear headphones when we're playing because
yours is an exclusively physical problem here. It
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the game.
nope. But I do have definitely some differences that I've noticed. But I think, Kimmy,
Hmm.
you make a really good point about the fact that we are not talking over each other as much and we're not
Mhm.
interrupting and we're actually listening to what the other players are doing instead of having side conversations while other people are off doing other things. Now, whether or not people are really paying attention, maybe they're on their phone, maybe they are doing something else on the computer.
Yeah,
Um,
that happens.
Yeah,
yeah.
James.
No,
Uh-huh.
I'm not. This is less about me. I mean, like I've done it before. I think everybody's guilty of doing it. You do
Oh
it at the
yeah.
table though too. Even if
Mhm.
you're playing in person, people will be on their phones. They'll be grabbing snacks. You'll be having side conversations. And I think it's the same deal on Roll20 or whatever platform you're using. If you're playing online, plenty of people play it in even just like a Skype call and don't do anything with battle maps or dice rolls or anything like that. You do have to deal with that issue of players doing other stuff. I think the worst I've ever had is I was DMing a game and one of my players, I got the Steam notification that they had booted up another game in the middle of our session. I immediately
Wow.
dropped the description. I was like, "Get the flip off this game, man, or I'm terminating the whole session. We're done." Um,
Oh, wow.
but yeah, there's still that risk of people doing other things, but I think generally it's a lot harder to keep a online game going if you're not paying attention. So people are a little more driven to pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually started up a full-blown game. I've not even played like a side game yet. I've had
Hmm.
Facebook open. I checked my email before and I I did what else? Oh, and I bought makeup.
You're sounding pretty innocent over there, Kim.
Yeah, no, I'm not
She
innocent at
just
all.
admitted she bought makeup.
Oh, I
I would
played games on my phone.
yeah.
I
I mean
played
like
Castle Cats and Animal Restaurant. No
dude, that
shame.
is so addictive.
So I just like that it's not so loud. We're not talking over each other all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It doesn't cause as much of a volume induced headache. But I have noticed some other differences. I like that we actually have a map now.
Mhm.
So you
It's
mentioned
hard to go back.
it
It's
I
hard to go
is.
back to
know.
theater of the mind once you get a map.
And I would argue that we're still doing a lot of theater of the mind because the map is not super detailed and
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
there are some differences. But our campaign with the Tomb of Annihilation is particularly confusing for theater of the mind, in my opinion.
Yes.
I would also agree. Yes.
Don't tell our DM this. I went back and looked at the first floor map for the tomb now that we're like pretty deep into it, just to see how my head canon of what it looks like actually charted to what the map looked like. Not at
No,
all.
no,
I
nope.
was way off. I was so far off. Oh my gosh.
I am not surprised to hear that. It's probably the same for me. So I do enjoy having the map because of our campaign being particularly confusing. And you mentioned, James, that some people just play via Skype, and that made
Mhm.
me think of when we were playing and trying to get our friends from a distance to join us. So sometimes we would Skype you in.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of them was me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes we would Skype Chad in. So we tried to play with Skype, and there was just such a disconnect playing with some people digitally and some people at the table in person.
Mhm.
And Skype was just very slow and it lagged, and their audio wasn't very loud. So I love that using our Discord chat and then having Roll20 up really the technology is there now to make this so seamless and very easy to do. So I
It's
really like
definitely in a good place.
it is in a good place. I really enjoy having the map. I enjoy the fact that we can easily chat and have side conversations if necessary through text and
Mhm.
then stay focused on the game with our voices and what we're listening to and that sort of thing. So honestly, I think that's the biggest difference. I have also noticed that I am more encouraged to look something up if I don't know what it is, like the
Mhm.
devils we were facing, for example,
Mhm.
which I would not have done if we were playing around the table. I may have asked for a more detailed description, but I would
Yeah.
not have looked it up for myself. And I honestly don't know if that is a good or a bad thing because I might be accidentally looking at information the DM doesn't want me to
I
have.
can yeah, I can weigh in on that too. There's pros and cons to that. Speaking as a DM doing online games,
Yeah.
um, it's nice to be able to have that information at your fingertips. I've personally put a rule on my tables or digi tables, um, that players aren't allowed ideally you can't control what they're doing. They're gonna
Mhm.
if they're gonna look it up, they're gonna look it up. But I ask them to please not look up anybody. If I have a creature that it seems like it has a weird arbitrary description they may not be familiar with, like most people might know what a goblin looks like, but not everybody knows what a grick looks like. I
Mhm.
will grab a Google image result and drop it in the chat so that they can reference
Mhm.
what this thing looks like. But I've had players in the past search this thing for one reason or another. Maybe they wanted to know what it looked like. Maybe they wanted to know a little bit about the lore because they rolled a really good arcana check or something about these creatures and they end up getting the whole stat table. And I had one player out the armor class to the party and out the hit points and out the damage. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You got to back it up. I understand. I really appreciate your enthusiasm and I understand you wanting to know more about these creatures,
Mhm.
but especially when it's the first time you're encountering these things and you're a low level party, a lot of these players were like the first time they were ever playing was in this campaign.
Got you.
And
Mhm.
some DMs like revealing more of that. I personally like the idea the first time you're a green adventurer, you've never come across some of these creatures before. You may know what
Exactly.
a goblin is, but you don't know, you know, again, what a Grick is, you might not know what they can attack like, you might not know how tough they are, and I like some of that mystery being there and you discover it over time, and maybe the
Mhm.
next time you come across it, I'll out some of that detail. I don't want you Googling it and spoiling that mystery aspect and knowing what they can do, right out the gate at least,
Yeah, it
um,
takes you out of the ambiance of the situation. You're no
for sure.
longer the character in the game discovering this information. You're just the player again.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, there's definitely a challenge to playing online. I don't think that is something that is specific to Roll20, of course, but since
No.
we're talking about the negatives, let's go ahead and share one negative thing and then one positive thing that we really enjoy specifically about Roll20, since it's what we're using. So, Kim, will you
Roll20 devs take
start?
note.
Do you
Oh my
do you
goodness.
want do you want me to say both or like we're going to do all negatives and then all positives?
All negatives and then all positives. So, go ahead and tell me one negative thing that you think could be improved about our Roll20 experience, or something that you just don't like as much as us playing around a table in person.
I don't know the whole like what Roll20 has to offer for mappage and how that works, but I think I would like I don't know, I just don't like how the maps look. I like their function like
Hmm.
for playing. I like playing with a map. I didn't think I would ever like playing with a map, and I did a little bit
Mhm.
when I played with my friend Michael as a DM like at his house and then now online. I really do like playing with a map. I just don't like the maps of Roll20. I just so far. I mean, I haven't been
Now
exposed
when
to
you
tons of stuff.
when you say you don't like the maps of Roll20, what do you mean by that? Because, uh, typically the map that you're encountering in the game is just an image that was grabbed by the DM. If you're like in our case, the
Oh,
maps that we're encountering come directly from the adventure module,
uh-huh.
and uh, our DM has just uploaded those and is using those within Roll20. So this might be a criticism of the artist for that campaign rather than the
Well, no,
Roll20
like
application itself.
they 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 look okay. I kind of want a function of like my pawn can go anywhere
Hmm.
and so I can lose it in darkness on accident, which I've done
Yeah.
before. And it's like I can walk through walls, and I think it just be I want more a bit like immersion. I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't want to be able to lose my pawn, and I want my pawn to physically not be able to move past a pillar that's in my way or stuff like that. I don't know. I
Sure.
just feel like moving your pawn anywhere you want is like an in-person table thing. I just kind of maybe want like the next step
Yeah.
in Roll20.
And
That makes sense.
they have some options like that. I'll save some of my comments on it until we get a little bit more into my experience with the tool set more in depth.
Mhm.
But there is some stuff built into Roll20 that allows you to do that. And if you
Like
don't
if
mind me just kind of going off of you and going into my negatives, because this
Yeah.
perfectly segues. Um, I feel like Roll20 has a lot of really cool stuff built into it tool wise, and I know that some of the other tabletop tools do as well. If this is a particular criticism of Roll20, I think they've got some room to grow when it comes to making things user friendly and accessible right out the gate. Certain aspects like the chat make a lot of sense. You type stuff in, it gets spit out in the chat log. Other things like how Fog of War works and getting maps uploaded and aligned to the grid and understanding the intricacies of the character sheets and stuff like that requires a bit of digging and research on your own part. I gave a buddy actually just yesterday a hour and a half class basically on Roll20 because he'd never DM'd in it before, and he ended up using probably 10% of the stuff I ended up showing him just because there was a lot of overwhelming information that isn't very easy to understand at face value.
Mhm.
I feel that. I guess my only negative is that the space that you're given
Mhm,
has a lot going on with those like people tokens that
Mhm.
have our avatars on them. They're like so big compared to the screen and they just like take up the entire bottom. And then you have the map, which is constantly moving and changing. And then on the right, you have the chat, which could honestly probably be a little bit smaller. So it doesn't take up as much of the map space. And then you have to juggle your character sheets, and there's a lot of juggling involved. And I do like that you can pop
Yeah.
out your character sheet to be in its own tab, but I also have some issues with the character sheet. I kind of wish there were more places for me to type things in because I found that I am just still
mhm.
using my physical character sheet because it's way easier to keep track of things because if it's not a specific ability or a specific item or something like that, there's nowhere to write it on your digital character sheet. And I
Yeah,
understand that there's some necessity in that because a lot of those things on the character sheet are clickable and
mhm.
so they will do automatic rolls and things for you, which is totally
Mhm.
awesome. I do wish that the interface was a little bit cleaner and you didn't have to juggle so many things at once. Now, I don't know if that's really a criticism of Roll20 or the fact that there's just so much to keep track of during a game of D&D. I do know that there are
Probably a little of column A and column
Could
B.
you
yeah,
imagine playing 4th edition on Roll20?
People do it. I mean, it's built out for any tabletop game. Roll20 was not designed exclusively for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm just
That's
talking about
exactly.
actually
the bookkeeping behind it. Like
that's fair. You can get crazy. I've seen some people with so I feel like my games at this point, because I've been DMing in Roll20 for at this point 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
Because most of my games, actually all of the games I'm running right now are in Roll20. I'm not doing anything in person. I've had a couple sessions offhand that have been IRL, but everything else has been in Roll20. And I've definitely seen my games evolve to a point where now, if you looked at them as someone just coming into the system, you'd be like, they're doing so much. I don't understand it. And I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface. Like I just started introducing maps into the game in the last like year or two that are actually like tracked to the grid and everything. Before that, I was just doodling everything. It has a lot of flexibility with the type of tools that you have on hand, but the bookkeeping aspect would get nuts. I've seen some people build out the modules though that they release because you can buy Roll20 pre-built modules. Like I'm running Curse of Strahd. All of that stuff is accessible in Roll20 if you want to buy that version of it rather than the book. And you get like the compendium with all of the notes. Every monster has all of its details in there. Like you can track everything if you want in Roll20, but you have to understand how it works.
That's pretty awesome though.
Yeah.
Is there a reason, and this is maybe just for you, for James, I don't know. Is there a reason why we use Discord for the call and not use Roll20? Because isn't those little where our avatars are at the bottom? That's
Mhm.
actually supposed to be video of us because you can allow
Yes.
Roll20 to have access to your camera so you can
And
see
I've got
everything.
it open right now just so I could reference it, and I'm looking at my little avatar in the bottom corner. Um, I've always just found using a separate dedicated video and audio feed to be a bit more reliable. I've
Mhm.
had some issues with connectivity,
Okay.
especially because I have like an audio interface and all this great. And some of my other friends do that too with these way more involved rigs than just like mic straight into the line feed on your computer. and getting it to consistently stay connected with your video device and your audio device has proven a mixed bag of success. Whereas using Discord or Google Hangouts or something for the audio portion and or video, and then just focusing on Roll20 for the sake of the game is a little easier to me.
Uh-huh.
Maybe other people have that better success, but I've always found it when you add more variables to the equation with the AV stuff, it gets complicated, and
Gotcha.
Roll20
Okay.
is not as big a fan.
That makes 100% sense.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Plus, I'm assuming that Roll20 has servers that are dedicated to managing these uh,
Probably, yeah.
videos, and yeah, that's a lot for them to handle, especially right
Mhm.
now.
Oh, live video processing is nuts regardless from a developmental standpoint. So when you put the weight of an obscenely high amount of D&D games probably moving online, I imagine it's a lot of server strain on their part. So,
Right.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Now, I was going to mention that there are other platforms out there for tabletop, such as there's one called Astral, and that is newer and it is temporarily free. And there is one called Fantasy Grounds, but there are other options out there. Now, what are some of the reasons that we use Roll20 specifically?
mhm.
Obviously, it's free, it's easy to access, it has a lot of tools and features. But, Kimmy, what is one thing that you are really enjoying about Roll20 specifically?
So I've looked at the fantasy one before, like because I saw it like as an ad, and I just like went and looked to see what it was about.
Fantasy
So just
Grounds?
Fantasy Grounds, yes, that's like the only one I've gotten to see besides Roll20. The thing I love most about Roll20 was the first day I logged in, I at least knew I could play. Like it didn't seem daunting, overwhelming. It seemed pretty straightforward. Yeah, you had to dig for stuff, but it was in areas that made sense. Like, oh, here's my character sheet. Okay, if I click here, that makes it, I see the word for like with advantage and then word for disadvantage, and so like that's what I liked the most about it was every time I get on, I do discover something new, but I never once felt overwhelmed. Where like when I went to look at Fantasy Ground, it's a bit more confusing when you first log on. Like it looks nice, but
Mhm.
I couldn't tell where everything was. Where Roll20, they're just tabs, which I appreciate. So I do like that.
Okay, so you like the simplicity of the design?
Yeah, I
White
think it's user friendly.
background, black font, tabs, really basic, straightforward, easy to figure out for new beginners.
Nothing too distracting, so you could really focus on the game and what the DM's saying and the players. You're not like looking everywhere. You're looking at the map because that's what catches your attention.
Okay. Okay, so James, what is one thing that you really love about Roll20 specifically?
So I really like how uh, what's the right way to say, how mature of a product it is comparatively to some of the other ones that I've seen. I've always kind of found myself in Roll20, which partially is just name recognition and everything. When I started doing online D&D, it's just kind of the first one that you hear about. But after exploring some of the other options, I do feel like they have a very fleshed out product that, because it's been around for longer and they've gone through some of the trials and tribulations of getting something like this set up, they've put a lot of effort into making the tool set very robust. You have a lot of different options of things you can do, be it adding all of these different settings and stuff to your tokens. They've got, especially if you pay for the premium tier, they've got dynamic lighting that you can do, so that rooms are actually being revealed as you move your token around. Um,
Oh, wow.
you have the entire compendium stuff built in to get access to both the stuff that Wizards has published in the system reference document, along with other modules that they put out if you want to pay for those. You can add all of your own stuff and build your own tracking. You've got audio built in. There's a ton of stuff that is in that package that, while I did say that like some of it's a bit confusing to learn right out the gate, they don't overstuff it in a way that like everything is in your face and you're trying to parse through all the information on screen. If you want to just drop in, play a game of D&D with minimal stress, and literally the only thing you really care about tracking is like dice rolls that people can't do online otherwise, You could do that in Roll20 in seconds. Like set up a campaign,
Yeah.
start rolling dice, not bother with the maps, not bother with the tokens. You're just using it as like voice chat and dice rolls, super easy. Or you can go batshit crazy and do crazy token settings with dynamic lighting and get all of your module stuff in there with notes that players can see, passing out handouts, background music, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how much they do offer. I really loved the free music options that they had. I thought that was really neat.
Mhm.
And I do think that the automated rolls or the dice rolling commands are very cool, even
Mhm.
though I was a little skeptical at first and I also didn't want to switch from real dice and I thought it would be a headache, but it has been pretty nice to just click claws, claws whenever I want my dragonborn to attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about the changes that we've experienced. And then, James, I also want you to talk more about what it's like from a DM's perspective.
Absolutely.
So, overall, does anybody have any comments on our changed experience from being used to meeting once a week in person and playing as a group to moving solely online? We've made a lot of comments about what's positive and what's negative about those experiences, but does anybody have anything else they want to say about the change before we move on?
I'm used to it. I guess like I've not been nearly as impacted as other people because like I said, all my other games that I'm running are online and are on Roll20. So I'm accustomed to Dungeons and Dragons, meaning sitting down at a computer and talking to people that are not in the immediate house that I'm sitting in. That said, it's kind of weird jumping from a in-person campaign to a digital campaign, especially if it's the same group and we're picking up where we left off. It took a bit of adjustment to get used to seeing the map and knowing what I'm dealing with and moving my guy around and trying to deal with the same struggles that I would normally deal with a Roll20 campaign, but never really had to deal with at a table. And conversely, having access to information suddenly, like the map, in a digital campaign that we didn't have when we were just playing theater of the mind at a table. And I'm kind of hoping we just wrap up this campaign in here at this point. I have no idea how long we're going to be hanging out at home primarily, but I'm kind of crossing my fingers that at least if things lighten up pretty soon, we've gotten through the dungeon that we're in and I can comfortably go back to not having a map because it's going to be really hard to give that up if we get back into person and we're still in the tomb at this point.
No, I hope we finish Tomb of Annihilation on Roll20.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I guess if I were going to say anything, I was dreading this because I've never played online before, so it was something new. And I'm a very social person and I love getting to see my friends and being around you guys. And I thought this is just going to like be sad, like just sitting here by myself, just listening, trying to have a D&D experience that's just not like I've ever had before. I was wrong. I will say I'm wrong. I enjoy this so much. It's different, but
Mhm.
I still think it's so fun and I still find myself getting excited for D&D nights and wanting to play.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I find that when we're together in person, I am a little bit more distracted and willing to talk about personal things and when we sit down to play D&D on Roll20,
Mhm.
it's to play.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
And I have also noticed that there's a little bit less role playing happening because we can't.
Maybe for you.
Well,
I'm always in character.
this is true. I felt like I've been able to stay in character more easily, but also since we're talking less, there's less role playing happening.
That's fair.
So maybe
Yeah.
there's not as much well, I wouldn't even say there's not as much character development happening. I don't know, maybe the role play aspect has just been a little bit different because you're
Yeah.
not physically there like in person, like making
I think it's
faces,
driven
crossing your
more
arms.
by the narrative that we're immediately experiencing and less about the side conversations that you're having with other
Yeah.
characters or getting to just, make a joke or something with your friends as your character. I'm not doing nearly as much cracking wise to whoever's sitting next to me at the time,
Yep.
but the role playing that I am doing is much more dedicated to interacting with NPCs or having meaningful conversations instead of the
Yeah.
stuff that pads it out and ultimately contributes nothing to the story.
Oh, I would agree. And I also feel like we're moving a bit faster because there's not so much role play right now.
Also, he doesn't have to re-explain a room 4 times for us to grasp the
That's true.
concept.
Our poor DM. So, James, do you have any experience specifically as a dungeon master using
Oh boy, do
Roll20?
I? Yeah. Yeah, so so like I mentioned, like I most of the games that I run as DM are in Roll20. I back in college did a couple that were in person, but the last couple years here that I've been running stuff has largely been in Roll20 and online in general. And I've uh I've loved doing it. I've loved using specifically Roll20, but I like being able to use any of the online tool sets that we have available to keep my games running because I've got players that I absolutely adore playing with and don't like the physical limitation of having to be at a table in order to uh do collaborative storytelling with them like Dungeons and Dragons.
I was just gonna say, what keeps you coming back to Roll20?
For me, I have spent a lot of time learning the ins and outs of the system and have really come to appreciate what they have to offer. I think at the beginning, if I was as familiar with other tools like right out the gate, especially when it wasn't as developed a product, um, it would have been, take it or leave it, whatever. It was never a bad product. But it just, when I was starting out, I was doodling on the map page and using chat for roles, and that was basically it. So I wasn't really taking full advantage of what it had to offer. But now, especially, I'm uploading maps, aligning things to grids. I've got the premium subscription now, so I have the dynamic lighting that you can use to hide and reveal rooms based on what the players actually can see, and like illuminate things based on dark vision, and not allow them to leave or exit the room if the door's not open or anything like that. That does require a lot more time on the DM's part to get things set up, but really gives you a fleshed out, robust experience that gets you more immersed and can lead to some really cool moments in it.
I was going to ask about the time aspect of it because it
Mhm.
sounds like running a game on Roll20 would just add so much prep time for the DM that it would be a little bit intimidating. And it made me wonder which you would prefer if, you know, time and space and distance weren't part of the equation. Would you prefer DMing in person or on Roll20? But then you made the point that, like, you don't always have to use those features for it
No.
to be enjoyable. But which would you prefer? Like, if none of
Well,
the other factors were.
I think there's pros and cons about. I have sessions that I run on Roll20 where it's almost entirely theater of the mind. You're sitting there just describing what's going on while the players are looking at the map. Um, Not every single session needs to be a super involved, fleshing out every room in the temple with doors being locked and placing every enemy token or anything like that. But I like having the option. If it were prep time in person, I think that has its own challenges. Getting a map that's appropriately to scale, everybody having minis that they enjoy working with. You can play with printed out photos of the characters that are cut into circles or whatever, but like I like that using a digital system at least, um, everybody's kind of on the same playing field, and you have a certain standard that's just set as a threshold. If you want to go that far, you don't have to feel like you're half-assing it by not having a token. Everybody works basically within what you're comfortable with. I probably would prefer prep time wise, the digital stuff, just because A, I'm used to it. B, I have access to a lot more things that I can quickly get in there. It takes a while if I want to go the whole 9 yards with setting up lighting and rooms and different encounters and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have the ability to spin up a custom map and get it uploaded within the afternoon instead of having to figure out how I'm going to print it out and get it the right size. For April Fool's Day, I ran an entire encounter at a fantasy Applebee's that I just spent the afternoon making a map in one of my map making tools. And it was all set up. I made a menu in Photoshop, and I could get all of that uploaded and ready to go in 15 minutes. Making the map was the hardest part. Whereas trying to do that in person would have taken a lot more effort if I wanted to not just have a whiteboard that I was drawing on. I can deliver a better standard of quality for my players quicker with online prep.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I was thinking that playing in person has a sort of old fashioned nostalgic charm to it,
Mhm.
but you make a really good point that the quality of your preparation, the DM's side of things, definitely is easier when you're using Roll20.
Yeah. And there's a big draw for in person. I love playing in person. I love that our campaign meets on a regular basis and getting to spend that time and roll real dice. Granted, I roll real dice as that DM anyway, even though
Yeah.
the tools are there in Roll20. I reserve the right to fudge my rolls if I need to because I want a cool story at the end of the day. So I'm a roll in person because it may be really badass for the players to uh, cast the spell on the enemy and they would have made their save, and I can be like, oh no, they didn't make their save. It's good. Yeah, you kicked their ass, bud. Um,
Yeah, maybe a certain Kanku wouldn't have died for the third time if rolls were being made in
hey,
person.
you can't talk smack. You've been trying to kill that Kenku for the last 3 months.
I did
Um,
not say anything yet.
no, not you.
Oh.
This is a criticism of her.
I mean, I've been
Hey,
trying to get the Kenku killed for a long time, and he just was like able to like roll shit out of his ass until finally he went head first into something.
you have created some really disgusting imagery that I think begs us to move on.
But yeah, anyway, the draw of tabletop play and being in person is certainly real, and there's a lot of benefit to that. But when it comes to delivering a consistently high quality campaign where you get a great visual for the maps and you feel invested in your tokens and you feel uh, immersed with sound design with tracks that you're uploading or pulling from the free stuff, or having full rule sets accessible with a couple keystrokes. I think it's easier to do that with a digital game like Roll20. It's not that it can't be done at tabletop, but it's a lot harder and you need a lot more resources.
All right, well, at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned that I asked my friend Miles, who is part of the customer service team and runs a team for Roll20. They're called the XP team, by the way, their customer
Ooh.
service team. And I asked him 3 questions. So I'm going to go ahead and read those questions and his answers to give a little bit more insight as to the changes that Roll20 is experiencing because of social distancing. And then
Mhm.
we'll go ahead and wrap up. So, question number 1, I asked him, have you seen an influx of new players due to social distancing? Miles said, absolutely. Our traffic is certainly up, and we are doing our best to make sure that everyone can have a good experience. For us, that involves making sure our server uptime is at the high and that we are meeting folks where we are needed. A big focus for my team, XP team, is tackling the learning curve and getting anyone who needs it the info they need to get started playing ASAP. Question number 2, do you or the Roll20 team have any comments about D&D as a way to cope/stay social during this time? Miles said, tabletop RPGs as a whole are a fantastic way to stay social. I would be remiss to only talk about D&D, which is the system my games are using right now, haha, because there are so many great systems that are out there. It is reassuring to see some of these newer systems get some extra playtime as folks branch out and explore. More on staying social/coping. I know for myself, and many of us internally, gaming has been a great break from thinking about everything that is going around the world. We are grateful that we are able to provide the same comfort to our users during a time when they might need it most. If playing a game helps you relax and forget your problems for even a few minutes, it is worth it. And finally, number 3, has your work been impacted by recent events? The honest answer is yes, it absolutely has. The company as a whole has had to shift priorities to make sure we can handle the influx of new users. Keeping the service up and running was already a high priority, as you would expect for any online service, but I don't think anyone can ever prepare well enough for a pandemic, and at this point, I think we have held on pretty well, all things considered. To speak more to the XP team side of things, my team which handles customer support, we have certainly had to adapt to the changes. We have a lot of folks trying out Roll20 for the first time, or folks who are just coming back after a hiatus, or some who speak a different language, and so on, and they all need our help. We take that responsibility very seriously, and we are working hard to help as many people as possible start playing. So I thought his answers were really interesting and insightful,
Mhm.
and definitely makes the point that a lot more people are playing on Roll20 because of social distancing, and a lot more people are even trying D&D for the first time because it's such a great way to, hang out with your friends when you can't physically be with them in person.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Miles. That was really cool.
Yeah, that was really neat. I'd love to hear more down the road, even just on more insights on the inner
Yeah,
workings of the company and the product.
Absolutely. I've
that's so
talked to him
cool.
about potentially doing a full on Roll20 interview, so hopefully we can look forward to that in the future. And
Hot
thank
dang,
you
that'd be
again,
neat.
Miles. I know, right?
Heck yeah.
So, we also want to hear from our listeners about your experiences, whether you've used Roll20 or whether you prefer another system, or how you've been continuing your campaign during social distancing. So, please reach out to us. Before I give you all the places where you can reach us and share your stories with us, Kimmy, James, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up this episode?
If you're curious and just wanted to weigh in on some options, I think Roll20 would be a really good introduction to D&D too, to people that aren't,
For sure.
you know, uh, not just because they're not allowed to be around people, but if there were people that, social anxiety even, this would be a really good way to kind of ease your way into Dungeons and Dragons and get a feel for what it's about.
Hmm.
I was thinking about that. Yeah.
I do think it's a wonderful means of both a getting people exposed to Dungeons and Dragons and or any game system. You know, it doesn't have to be D&D. You can run Pathfinder, you can run Call of Cthulhu, you can run really anything within Roll20. Uh, and they've got a lot of pre-built sheets and mechanics for all sorts of different game systems. But it is a fantastic way to stay in touch with people from a distance. I'm still playing games with people that I went to high school with and college with that have since moved out of town or live in a different city than me, or even live in the same city, but we can't hang out with each other right now. Um,
Yes,
and it's nice
unfortunately.
being able to stay in touch with them. Yeah, I've still super close with some of my high school friends because of this, because we have this weekly thing that we can jump in on together and bond on, even when one of us is on the East Coast and the other's on the West Coast, and some of us are in the Midwest. And uh,
Hmm.
the worst thing we have to deal with is time zones instead of having to
Yeah.
fly across the country just to get together.
That's wonderful. And
Hmm.
these comments have really inspired me to want to try new game systems as well. And millennials, we would love to hear your thoughts on Roll20 and playing D&D during social distancing. So please reach out to us. If you have any specific questions that you want to ask us via email, you can always email us at mfgpodcast@gmail.com. Please check out our Facebook page. If you search Millennial Focus Group, you'll find us there, and you can follow us for character prompts that we post that get you talking about your own characters, and you can also share your stories about playing on Roll20 on our Facebook page. You can also join our new Discord server if you would like to share your stories there, but you're not one to use Facebook. So we can get you an invite to our Discord server. You can also follow us on Instagram at MFG Podcast, and you can follow us on Twitter at Avocado Toasters or search Millennial Focus Group. And finally, you can also check out our episodes and our other videos on YouTube if you search MFG TV. Did I miss anything, Kimmy?
Come hang out with me on TikTok.
All right, can't forget that. Thank
Yeah.
you, Kimmy.
So Millennial Focus Group does have a TikTok. MFG Podcast is what you would search. It's just mostly for fun D&D content that we want to put out.
All right, so one more time, please share your stories about Roll20 with us. We would love to hear from you. And we would love to hear if you have other preferred ways of playing D&D during social distancing. It'll help us out a ton, and we always love to talk about D&D. Thank you again, James, for joining us for this episode and sharing your
Yeah, of course.
valuable experience as a DM.
Yes, thank you so much, James.
No problem.
All right, and thank you, millennials. Bye.